The rain in Viridian City isn't just water. It's a solvent. It falls with a steady, percussive hiss, dissolving the hard edges of the skyline, bleeding the neon signs into watercolors of despair, and washing the grit from the gutters into the city's dark heart. It's been falling for 3 weeks straight, a ceaseless baptism for a city that forgot how to be clean. For a man like me, a man who makes his living wading through the filth, the rain is just background noise, a constant, damp companion that seeps into your bones and reminds you that some stains never wash away. My name is Jack Harding. I'm a detective with the VCPD, Homicide Division. My knuckles are scarred from conversations that went south. My face is a roadmap of too many long nights lit by morgue fluorescence, and my soul is as gray as the perpetual overcast sky. Tonight, the rain was my partner as I stood over the body of Alistair Finch. The penthouse apartment was an altar to modern wealth, glass, chrome, and minimalist art that probably cost more than my house. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the ventilation and the distant drumming of rain against the panoramic windows. But all the money in the world couldn't buy Finch a different ending. He was slumped in a ridiculously expensive leather armchair, facing a wall of glass that overlooked the weeping city. He was dressed in a silk robe, a half-empty glass of amber liquid on the table beside him. It would have looked peaceful, if not for the thing on his head. It was a crown, a grotesque, twisted thing, fashioned from rebar and broken glass, the shards catching the light like 1,000 tiny, accusing eyes. It had been forced down onto his scalp with savage intent, and the result was a grim parody of royalty. Blood had traced intricate patterns down his pale, arrogant face, pulling on the silk of his robe. "What do you make of it, Jack?" The voice belonged to Marcus, my partner. He was a bull of a man, with a kind face that didn't belong in this line of work. He was chewing on an unlit cigar, a habit he'd picked up after his third divorce. He claimed it helped him think. I thought it just made him look like he was perpetually disappointed in the world. He wasn't wrong to be. I knelt, the joints in my knees cracking a protest. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the faint, cloying smell of ozone, like the aftermath of a lightning strike inside a sealed tomb. I make of it that somebody had a flair for the dramatic. And a grudge. A grudge? Marcus grunted, his gaze sweeping the sterile perfection of the room. Finch was a property developer. His list of grudges probably has its own zip code. He bulldozed entire neighborhoods to put up these glass towers, threw people out of their homes like they were yesterday's trash. So, we're looking for a disgruntled tenant with a penchant for arts and crafts, I muttered, my eyes scanning the room. No signs of forced entry. The security on this place was top of the line, biometric locks, motion sensors, the works. Whoever did this was either invited in, or they were a ghost. Forensics found something, Marcus said, pointing with his cigar. On the floor, by the window. I walked over, my shoes making no sound on the polished marble. A single, perfect black feather lay there, stark against the white stone. It was pristine, untouched by the blood and chaos. It felt deliberate. A signature. A feather, I said, a strange sense of unease creeping up my spine. What? Our killer is a crow. Maybe he's Icarus, a voice chirped from the doorway. Detective Miller. Young, ambitious, with a jawline you could sharpen a knife on and a condescending smirk permanently etched on his face. He thought procedure and algorithms could solve any crime, and viewed my methods, a mix of gut instinct and dogged pavement pounding, as antiquated. Flew too close to the sun, and all that poetic justice crap. I ignored him. My head was already starting to thrum, a dull ache behind my eyes that had become my shadow these last few months. The insomnia was getting worse. It wasn't just sleeplessness, it was a hollowing out. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind a churning vortex of old cases, forgotten faces, and a gnawing, shapeless guilt I couldn't name. The nights bled into days, and sometimes I'd lose track. I'd find myself driving with no memory of my destination, or wake up with my heart hammering against my ribs, the ghost of a nightmare clinging to me like smoke. Bag it, I told the forensics tech. Let's see what the lab says about the crown and the feather. And I want a full breakdown of Finch's life. Lovers, enemies, business partners. I want to know who he preyed to and who he preyed on. As we left the sterile opulence of the penthouse and descended back into the rain-slicked streets, the city lights blurred into a smear of cold fire. The feather, the crown. It felt like a statement. A prologue. I had the chilling certainty that this was just the first verse of a very dark song. And the rain kept falling, as if trying to wash away a stain that had already set. The next 72 hours were a deep dive into a sea of digital ink and human misery. Finch's life was a cesspool of shady deals, broken promises, and exploited people. We interviewed dozens. A ruined business partner with eyes full of hate, a former mistress with a story of casual cruelty, a family whose home was flattened to make way for one of Finch's monuments to greed. They all had motive. None of them had an alibi that couldn't be bent. The first major lead came from Finch's estranged son, Julian, a gaunt, hollow-eyed artist who lived in a warehouse down by the industrial canal. The place smelled of turpentine and rage. His sculptures were monstrous things, welded together from scrap metal, twisted into expressions of agony. They looked a lot like the crown. Did I hate my father? Julian said with a humorless laugh, gesturing around his metal graveyard. He was a monument to everything I despise. He saw people as assets and liabilities. He wouldn't know beauty if it bit him. So yes, I hated him. Poetically, you might say. We brought him in. He had no alibi for the night of the murder. Said he was communing with the rust. But there was no physical evidence, and his contempt felt too performative, too easy. After 8 hours of getting nowhere, we had to let him go. A promising thread that led to a frayed end. The insomnia was a relentless beast. My apartment had become a cave. Case files carpeted the floor, mixed with empty takeout containers and whiskey bottles. The air was stale with the ghosts of sleepless nights. I'd sit in the dark, the city's neon glow painting shifting patterns on the wall, and watch the rain. Sometimes, I thought I saw things in the curtains of water. Faces. A flash of wings. Sleep, when it came, was a battlefield. Fragmented images, flashes of violence, a feeling of falling. I woke up one morning with a deep scratch on my arm, with no memory of how I got it. I told myself I must have done it in my sleep, my own subconscious clawing for a way out. One night, I woke up standing in my kitchen, a glass of water in my hand, my heart racing. I couldn't remember getting out of bed. The gaps were widening. The second body turned up on a Wednesday. Her name was Judge Eleanor Vance. She was known as the hanging judge, a woman who preached morality from the bench while taking bribes in her chambers. We found her in the old municipal library, a place that had been abandoned for years, a cathedral of dust and silence. She was sitting at a long oak table in the main reading room, her hands neatly folded. In front of her was a set of antique brass scales. On one side, a pile of gold coins, gleaming in the beams of our flashlights. On the other, a human heart. Forensic analysis later confirmed it was her own. It had been removed with surgical precision. And on the table, next to the scales, lay a single black feather. "He's escalating," Marcus said, his voice low and reverent in the cavernous room. "This is biblical, theatrical. He's a moralist," I replied, the headache from the Finch crime scene returning with a vengeance. "He sees himself as a judge, jury, and executioner. Finch was a king of greed. Vance was a purveyor of false justice. He's creating tableaus, morality plays. A morality play that ends with a woman's heart on a scale?" Marcus shook his head. "This is a ghoul, Jack. A monster. I felt a strange chill, a flicker of something that felt like recognition. The precision, the symbolism. It was horrific, but it wasn't chaotic. It was controlled. It was art, in its own twisted way. I pushed the thought away. Empathizing with the killer was a dangerous path, a shortcut to the abyss. This time, the investigation yielded a new player, Elias Vance, the judge's estranged younger brother. A disgraced journalist turned conspiracy blogger who lived in a basement apartment wallpapered with newspaper clippings, maps, and string connecting photos in a spiderweb of paranoia. He smelled of stale coffee and obsession. My sister wasn't just corrupt, Detective, he hissed, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. She was a gatekeeper, a member of the Gilded Cage. The Gilded Cage? I asked, my pen hovering over my notebook. The secret heart of this city's rot, he declared, waving his arms at his web of conspiracies. A cabal of the rich and powerful. Finch was one of them. I'm sure of it. Who believe they're above the likes of us. They pull the strings. They decide who wins and who loses. My sister, she sold her soul for a seat at their table. Elias became a person of interest, a red herring cloaked in righteous fury. He had the motive, the obsession, and a deep-seated hatred for the city's corrupt elite. He was perfect, too perfect. That night, the gaps started. Not just the mental fog, but chunks of time, gone. I was at my desk, looking over the Vance case file, the gruesome photos spread out under my desk lamp. The next thing I knew, I was standing in front of my apartment door, keys in my hand, the collar of my trench coat soaked through. I'd lost 2 hours. I couldn't remember the drive home. I couldn't remember leaving the precinct. My heart hammered in my chest. I chalked it up to exhaustion. The case was getting to me. That's all it was. I started getting calls. No one on the other end. Just the hollow sound of an open line, a faint, rhythmic breathing. Sometimes, a whisper of static that almost sounded like a voice. A taunt. I changed my number. The calls started again the next day. I was being watched. The thought took root in my mind and grew like a weed. The killer wasn't just committing crimes, he was performing them for me. He knew my every move. The feathers weren't just a signature, they were a message, left for me to find. The pressure from upstairs was mounting. The media had dubbed the killer the Arbiter, and the name had stuck. Chief Donaldson, a man who cared more about press conferences than police work, was breathing down my neck. He decided to bring in a consultant, a forensic psychologist named Drive. Horace Thorne. Thorne was a stark contrast to the grit of the precinct. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with calm, analytical eyes that seemed to see right through you. We met in my office. He sat opposite me, his hands steepled, and listened as I gave him the rundown. The symbolism is fascinating, Thorne said in a smooth, measured voice. Our killer has a God complex, clearly. He's not just punishing his victims, he's recontextualizing them, turning them into symbols of their own sins. He's a lunatic, I countered, irritated by his detached analysis. Perhaps, but lunacy has its own logic, Thorne replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. He's intelligent, meticulous, and patient. And I believe he has a specific audience in mind. Tell me, Detective Harding, do you ever feel like he's speaking directly to you? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I gave him a noncommittal shrug, but the seed was planted. He was too perceptive. Thorne was dangerous. My paranoia led me to Silas. He was a whisper in the city's underbelly, an information broker with a network of eyes and ears in every dark corner of Viridian. He operated out of a forgotten jazz club, a place that smelled of stale smoke and regret. Silas was a wraith, thin and pale, with eyes that held the city's entire history of secrets. He sat in a booth, wreathed in shadow, a glass of something clear in front of him. Detective Harding, he rasped, his voice like rustling leaves. To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to confess your sins? I need information, I said, sliding into the opposite side of the booth. The crowned king and the heartless judge. The arbiter. What do you know? Silas smiled, a slow, predatory stretching of thin lips. The arbiter. Poetic. They say he's a ghost. A spirit of vengeance come to cleanse the city of its corruption. He took a slow sip of his drink. They say he targets those who have escaped true justice. And they say he never fails. I'm not interested in folklore, Silas. I want a name. A name? He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. A name has power, detective. But a ghost has no name. Perhaps you're not looking for a man. Perhaps you should be looking for a mirror. His words hung in the air, cryptic and unsettling. A mirror. What did that mean? Before I could press him, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. A gift, he said. For the man who has everything but sleep. I unfolded it. It was a list of names. Finches and Vances were on it, already crossed out. Below them were 3 more. One of them was circled in red ink. Benjamin Carter. A retired police captain. A man who had been my mentor. A man I'd once idolized, until I learned his brand of justice often involved looking the other way, for the right price. I looked up, but Silas was gone. Vanished back into the shadows he called home. My blood ran cold. The killer wasn't just one step ahead. He was directing the game. And he'd just given me the name of the next victim. Ben Carter lived in a small house on the city's industrial fringe, a place where the rain seemed to fall harder, washing rust from the corrugated iron roofs into the streets. We put his house under 24/7 surveillance. Miller scoffed, calling it a waste of resources based on a tip from a lowlife informant, but I pulled rank. I wasn't going to let Carter be the third act in this sick play. For 2 days, nothing happened. I barely slept, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. I sat in the unmarked car across the street, my eyes burning from staring at the house, watching the shadows play tricks on me. Marcus tried to get me to go home, to rest. You look like hell, Jack, he'd said, his voice thick with concern. You're running on fumes. You keep this up, you'll make a mistake. I can't, I told him. He's watching. I can feel it. On the 3rd night, I must have finally drifted off. Not into sleep, but into a heavy, dreamless void. One moment, I was watching the light in Carter's window. The next, I was jolted awake by Marcus shaking my shoulder. The sky was turning a bruised purple with the first hints of dawn. Jack, wake up. I was disoriented. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. What is it? What happened? He's gone, Marcus said, his face pale. Carter's not in the house. The surveillance team hasn't seen him come out. It's like he just evaporated. Panic seized me. We broke down the door. The house was empty, silent. A half-eaten meal sat on the kitchen table. The television was still on, casting a flickering blue light on the walls. It was like the rapture. But in the center of the living room floor, there was a message. It was a perfect circle of white salt. And in the middle of it, a single black feather. How? I whispered, the word catching in my throat. How did he get past us? We were here all night. Miller and his team swarmed the scene, their faces a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed accusation. My failure was palpable. Miller, in particular, looked at me with something akin to pity. Maybe you should take some time off, Harding. You're too close to this. I shoved past him, my mind racing. It was impossible. Unless the killer was already inside. Unless he was one of us. My eyes darted from face to face. The uniforms, the forensics techs, Marcus, Miller. Was his ambition a cover for something darker? Was he trying to frame me, to push me out? The paranoia was a physical thing now, a tightening in my chest. I trusted no one. Later that day, they found Ben Carter's body. He was at the old dockyards, a place of ghosts and decay. He'd been hung from the rafters of a derelict warehouse, his old service revolver clutched in his hand. The scene was staged to look like a suicide, but the medical examiner found he'd been drugged first, and tucked into the brim of his hat was a black feather. I went to the warehouse alone after forensics had packed up. The rain hammered on the tin roof, a deafening drumbeat. The place smelled of brine and rot. As I stood under the spot where they'd found Carter, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world tilted on its axis. Flash, a memory, not mine. Or was it? The rough texture of a rope in my hands, the dead weight of a body, the click of a hammer on an empty chamber, the feeling of cold, righteous satisfaction. I stumbled back, gasping, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. My head was splitting open. It was the stress, the lack of sleep. It had to be. But the memory felt so real, so vivid. That night, I went back to see Silas. I needed answers, but the jazz club was empty, the door locked. A notice was posted on the window, closed indefinitely. Silas had vanished again. He was the only one who connected the victims. He had to be the killer. He was playing with me, feeding me clues, enjoying watching me unravel. It was the only theory that made sense. I had to find him. My hunt for Silas led me to a new corner of the city's shadowed soul, an antique bookshop called the Oracle's Eye, run by a blind old woman named Cassandra. The shop was a labyrinth of towering shelves, thick with the scent of aging paper and dust. Cassandra sat behind a massive oak desk, her sightless eyes seeming to look right through me. "The man of smoke and whispers is gone," she said, her voice a dry rustle of pages. "He flew too close to a flame he did not understand." "You know who I'm looking for," I stated, my voice tight. "I know many things," she replied. "I know of the gilded cage that thinks itself a fortress. I know of the arbiter who has come to rattle its bars. And I know of the broken man who hunts his own shadow." Her words were riddles, each one another turn of the screw in my fracturing mind. The hunt for Silas consumed me. I tore through the city's underbelly, shaking down every lowlife and snitch I could find. I was operating on pure instinct, a feral animal on the scent. Marcus tried to reason with me, to get me to follow procedure, but I shut him out. This was personal. The time gaps were becoming more frequent, the blackouts longer. I'd wake up in my apartment with no memory of getting there, my clothes damp, mud-caked on my shoes. One time, I found a small, intricate knot tied in my shoelace, the same kind of knot forensics had found at the Vance scene. I stared at it for a long time, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. I told myself it was a coincidence. He was leaving me messages, taunting me. One blackout ended with me standing outside the gates of the old Viridian Asylum, a Gothic ruin on a hill overlooking the city. Rain lashed down, and I had no memory of driving there. A sudden, terrifying memory surfaced. My father, a cop like me, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, telling me about the darkness that sometimes came for him. He'd spent 6 months in this place before he died. Was I following him down the same path? During one of my sleepless nights, I found myself drawn to the precinct's cold case archives. The fluorescent lights hummed over rows of forgotten tragedies. On autopilot, I pulled the file for David Chen, my first partner. It was heavy, both literally and figuratively. David had been killed 10 years ago in a hostage situation gone wrong. I'd been the one to make the call to go in. It was the wrong call. David had taken a bullet meant for me. The guilt had been my constant companion ever since, the wound that never healed. As I sifted through the old reports and witness statements, a new, desperate theory began to form. What if the arbiter wasn't just a random moralist? What if this was all connected to David? The prosecutor who fumbled the case against his killer had retired in disgrace. The judge who let him walk on a technicality was Eleanor Vance, and the captain who had buried the internal investigation into my tactical error was Ben Carter. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone was avenging David, and they were using me as their audience. This new theory gave me a renewed, if manic, sense of purpose. I was no longer just hunting a killer, I was seeking justice for my friend. Driven by this conviction, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to see Sarah Chen, David's widow. She lived in a quiet suburb that felt a world away from the city's rot. The rain had softened to a drizzle here, and her garden was stubbornly green. Sarah opened the door, and for a moment, 10 years vanished. She looked older, lines of grief etched around her eyes, but she still had the same warmth. A warmth I felt I had no right to be near. "Jack," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something I couldn't name. Sadness, maybe. "It's been a long time. I'm sorry to bother you, Sarah," I said, my words feeling clumsy. "I need to ask you about David. About the case." We sat in her living room, surrounded by pictures of a life I had a hand in shattering. A photo of her and David on their wedding day. A picture of David holding their daughter, who was just a baby then. "Why now, Jack?" she asked, her gaze steady. After all this time? I told her about the Arbiter, about Vance and Carter. I laid out my theory that someone was avenging David. As I spoke, a flicker of fear crossed her face. "You think this is for David?" she whispered. "That's monstrous. David wouldn't have wanted this. He believed in the law, even when it failed." She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "You look terrible, Jack. Are you sleeping at all? David used to say you carried the whole world on your shoulders. I'm worried you're going to collapse under the weight of it." Her concern was a knife in my gut. I left her house feeling worse than when I'd arrived. The righteous anger that had been fueling me was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. My mandatory sessions with Dr. Thorne became a battle of wills. He'd ask probing questions about my past, about David, about my insomnia. I'd deflect, feeding him just enough to satisfy his curiosity without giving anything away. "Your father spent time at the Viridian Asylum, didn't he?" Thorne asked casually one afternoon, his question a perfectly aimed dart. "He struggled with episodes, dissociative states, similar to your own blackouts, perhaps?" I froze. "That's in my sealed juvenile record. Seals can be broken," he said smoothly. "You seem to have a remarkable insight into the killer's motivations, Detective. It's almost as if you understand him on a personal level." "It's my job to understand him," I shot back. "Is it?" he asked softly. "Or is it a relief to see someone finally mete out the kind of justice you wish you could?" His words were a scalpel, and I could feel them cutting close to the bone. I ended the session abruptly. Then came the final clue. An envelope slid under my office door. Inside, a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken years ago. I was younger, in my rookie uniform, standing next to David Chen. We were smiling. On the back of the photo, an address was scrawled, the Starlight Theater. And below it, the words, "Come see the final act." The Starlight was where David had been killed. My theory was correct. This was the endgame. "It's a trap, Jack," Marcus pleaded when I showed him. "He's luring you in. Let us set up a perimeter. Let's do this by the book." "No," I said, my voice flat. "This is between him and me. He wants me there alone. If he sees a single uniform, he'll vanish." Against his better judgment, Marcus let me go. "But he made me take a GPS tracker. Just in case," he said, his eyes filled with the worry that I couldn't afford to acknowledge. "Jack, listen to me. The tracker logs, they put you in the vicinity of every murder scene, around the time of death. I've been trying to explain it away, interference, a glitch, but I can't anymore. Talk to me." "It's him, Marcus," I snarled, the paranoia twisting his concern into accusation. "He's cloning my signal. He's framing me. I have to face him alone to prove it. The Starlight Theater was a decaying monument to a bygone era. The velvet seats were ripped, the gold leaf was peeling, and the air was heavy with the dust of forgotten performances. The rain outside was a distant, muted roar. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. My hand was on my gun. My heart was a jackhammer. The stage was lit by a single, bare bulb, casting long, dancing shadows. In the center of the stage, a single chair was placed. Someone was sitting in it. It was Silas. He was tied to the chair, his head slumped forward, a neat, precise bullet hole in his forehead. He was the fourth name on his own list, and on his lap, a small, ornate music box. I approached cautiously, my gun raised. This was the trap. The killer was here, watching me from the wings. "Show yourself," I yelled, my voice swallowed by the vast emptiness. "It's over." Only silence answered. I knelt by Silas's body. The music box was inlaid with mother of pearl. It felt familiar. My hand trembled as I reached out and opened it. A delicate, tinkling melody filled the theater. A lullaby. My mother used to sing it to me when I couldn't sleep. And inside the box, there wasn't a dancing ballerina. There was a mirror. A small, round mirror, angled up at me. I stared at my own reflection. The tired eyes, the lines of stress, the face of a man haunted by ghosts. A mirror. "Perhaps you should be looking for a mirror." Silas's words echoed in my mind. And then, it all came crashing down. The memories, not in fragments this time, but in a tidal wave. The feel of rebar, cold and rough in my hands, as I twisted into a crown. Alistair Finch laughing in my face, telling me I couldn't stop progress. He looked just like the slumlord who evicted my family when I was a child. The cold, sterile precision of a scalpel. Judge Vance, her face a mask of terror, begging. Her voice sounded just like the prosecutor who let David Chin's killer walk on a technicality. The weight of Ben Carter's body. The smell of his fear. He'd taught me how to be a cop. He'd also taught me how to look the other way, how to let the little sins slide. He was the one who taught me corruption was just another tool. He was the reason the investigation into David's death was buried. The silent jazz club. Silas, smiling his knowing smile. "They need a villain, detective," he'd rasped. "And so do you." He had provided the names, the staging grounds. He was an artist, and I was his medium. But he'd gotten too close. He'd started to understand. He was the loose end. The music box played on. My lullaby. The song that was supposed to bring peace. The gaps in time. The blackouts. The unexplained cuts and bruises. The clues I found that I didn't remember finding. The black feather I found in my own trench coat pocket one morning and dismissed as contamination. The shadowy figure I thought was hunting me was my own reflection in the rain-streaked glass. I wasn't hunting a killer. I was the killer. The guilt over David. The years of swallowing the city's corruption. The moral compromises. The darkness I inherited from my father. It hadn't just worn me down. It had broken me. It had created something else inside me. A second personality. A darker half. The arbiter. The part of me that couldn't live with the injustice anymore. The part that had decided to act, to deliver the judgment I never could. He was the one who couldn't sleep. He was the one who acted while I was lost in the void. He was the one who hunted down Silas to tie up the final loose end. He was the one who sent me the picture of David, to bring it all home, right here where it all went wrong. I looked at my hands. One was holding my service revolver. The other was holding the music box. I remembered everything, every single moment of every single murder, from a perspective that was both mine and not mine. The chilling satisfaction, the sense of purpose. I was a monster. The main doors of the theater burst open, flooding the aisle with blinding light and the silhouettes of armed men. Marcus was at the front, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. "Jack, what have you done?" His voice sounded like it was coming from a million miles away. I slowly raised my head, the music box still tinkling its innocent tune. I looked at the mirror inside its lid, at the face of the stranger staring back at me. And for the first time in months, I saw him clearly. The rain hammered against the roof of the old theater, a final, roaring applause for the end of the